Why does fat go to the belly on some people and the hips on others? Why does the same person gain belly fat specifically when they are stressed? And why does your face get leaner first when you lose weight, but your stomach refuses to follow? These are not random questions. They are pointing at something real. Your body does not distribute fat randomly. It follows a map, and 4 specific hormones are drawing that map every single day. Understanding which hormone is shaping your fat pattern is the difference between fighting your body and working with it. Today we are going through all 4, what each one does, where it sends fat, and how to directly change its behavior. Hormone number 1, cortisol. If your fat sits high on your stomach, firm, round, and protruding forward, cortisol is almost certainly involved. This is the survival hormone. In the ancient world, cortisol spiked when real physical danger was present. It mobilized energy fast, helped you run or fight, and then it dropped. Today the triggers are different. An overflowing inbox, a looming deadline, financial pressure, a difficult relationship. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference. It processes all of them as threats and releases cortisol accordingly. The problem is that these modern stressors never fully resolve. Cortisol stays elevated day after day, week after week. And over time, that chronic elevation rewires where your body sends excess energy. Here is the mechanism. When cortisol stays high, it breaks down muscle tissue and converts it into glucose. Your body is essentially liquidating its savings to fund an emergency that never arrives. That glucose enters your bloodstream, your pancreas releases insulin to manage it, and since you are not actually running from anything, the energy has nowhere useful to go. Insulin stores it as fat, specifically as visceral fat around your organs. Why there? Because the tissue in your abdominal region has roughly 3 times more cortisol receptors than fat tissue elsewhere in your body. Cortisol is drawn to that tissue like a magnet, and the fat it deposits there is not passive. Visceral fat produces its own local cortisol. The more of it you accumulate, the more cortisol signal is generated locally, which tells your body to store more visceral fat. It is a loop that tightens over time and becomes increasingly difficult to reverse without addressing the root hormone directly. Research has consistently shown that people with chronically elevated cortisol carry significantly more visceral fat even when total calorie intake is controlled. The fat is not coming from overeating, it is coming from the hormonal instruction to deposit energy in that specific location. How to address cortisol directly? The most common mistake is adding intense cardio to an already stressed body. High-intensity training spikes cortisol further. You are throwing fuel on a fire that is already burning. Instead, prioritize low-intensity zone 2 movement like long walks. This lowers cortisol rather than raising it. Protect your sleep with the same urgency as your work schedule. Even one night under 6 hours measurably impairs cortisol regulation the following day. Slow nasal breathing for just 5 minutes a day activates the parasympathetic nervous system and directly lowers cortisol. And deliberately reduce the volume of incoming information in the evening because your nervous system is still processing everything it consumed during the day. Hormone number 2, insulin. If your fat is more diffuse, sitting around your lower back, hips, and spreading across the midsection without the high firm protrusion of visceral fat, insulin is the likely driver. Insulin is the only true fat storage hormone in your body. Every time you eat, insulin rises. Every time insulin rises, your body enters storage mode. Fat burning stops. This is not a problem on its own. The issue is frequency and magnitude. In a world of constant eating, snacking, sweetened drinks, and highly processed foods, insulin stays elevated far more than it should. And when cells stop responding to insulin efficiently, which is called insulin resistance, the pancreas compensates by producing even more. Higher insulin means a stronger and more sustained fat storage signal. You can feel it in daily life. You feel drowsy after meals. You need caffeine to function in the morning. You crave sugar 2 to 3 hours after eating a full meal, and your fat does not move despite eating less. These are not willpower failures. They are symptoms of insulin running too high, too often, for too long. Why does insulin tend to send fat to the lower back and hips? When muscle tissue is not adequately developed to absorb glucose from the bloodstream, excess energy overflows into secondary fat storage sites. The lower back, hips, and lower abdomen become default overflow depots. This is why people who carry less muscle tend to accumulate fat more diffusely across the body, even at moderate calorie intakes. How to address insulin directly? Give your pancreas regular extended rest through intermittent fasting. Even a modest 16-hour window of not eating allows insulin to return to a genuine baseline. Make your first meal of the day protein and fat dominant. This avoids the morning insulin spike that sets the hormonal tone for hours afterward. Build and maintain muscle through resistance training 3 to 4 times a week. More muscle means more glucose storage capacity, which reduces the amount of insulin required to clear the same glucose load. And eat vegetables before carbohydrates at each meal. The fiber slows glucose absorption and significantly blunts the insulin response to that meal. Hormone number 3, estrogen. If your fat sits low, soft and stubborn, below the navel, concentrated around the hips and upper thighs, and it barely responds even when you lose weight elsewhere, estrogen dominance is the likely driver. Estrogen is not inherently a problem. It plays essential roles in dozens of biological processes for both men and women. The issue is imbalance, specifically a state where estrogen is disproportionately high relative to other hormones. This happens through 2 distinct pathways. The first is internal. Fat tissue itself, especially lower belly and hip fat, produces estrogen independently. The more of this fat you carry, the more estrogen your body generates locally. The more estrogen generated, the stronger the signal to store more fat in exactly those locations. It is a self-reinforcing loop that standard calorie reduction rarely breaks because the calorie restriction does not address the hormonal driver. The second pathway is external. We live surrounded by synthetic chemicals that behave like estrogen in the body. They are called xenoestrogens. They are found in plastic food containers, in the lining of canned foods, in synthetic fragrances, and in many personal care products. These chemicals bind to estrogen receptors and activate them the same way natural estrogen does. Research estimates that the average person absorbs microplastic particles equivalent to a credit card in weight every single week. That represents a continuous background load of estrogenic chemical signals that most people never account for. Why does estrogen send fat to the hips, thighs, and lower belly? These regions have a higher concentration of estrogen receptors than the upper body. This was originally an evolutionary advantage, allowing the body to store energy reserves specifically for reproductive functions. But in a state of estrogen dominance driven by environmental chemicals and visceral fat production, this distribution pattern becomes a persistent source of frustration. This fat type also tends to be the slowest to respond to conventional interventions. Not because it is impossible to shift, but because the intervention needs to target the hormone rather than just the calories. How to address estrogen directly? Reduce daily xenoestrogen exposure wherever practical. Never heat food in plastic containers. Switch to glass or stainless steel water bottles. Reduce synthetic fragrance exposure from personal care products. These are incremental changes that reduce cumulative hormonal pressure over time. Eat cruciferous vegetables consistently. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and kale contain a compound that converts in the gut into a molecule called DIM. DIM helps redirect excess estrogen toward a less potent form that the body can clear more easily. Support gut health through fiber-rich foods and fermented foods. A compromised gut reabsorbs estrogen that should be excreted, effectively recycling a hormone the body was already trying to eliminate. Build muscle through resistance training. Increasing muscle mass naturally shifts the testosterone to estrogen ratio in a direction that is less favorable to this type of fat storage. Hormone number 4, growth hormone. If your fat seems to be spreading more evenly as you get older, if you are losing muscle noticeably, if recovery from workouts takes longer than it used to, and if fat that was once easy to lose now simply does not respond the same way, declining growth hormone is likely contributing. Growth hormone peaks during adolescence and declines from there. After 30, levels drop roughly 15% per decade on average. This is not a disease, it is a natural trajectory. But it has significant consequences for body composition. Growth hormone does 2 things that directly affect where and how much fat your body stores. First, it supports the maintenance and development of muscle tissue. Muscle is your body's primary glucose sink. When muscle mass declines, glucose clearance becomes less efficient. Insulin has to work harder, it stays elevated longer, and more energy gets redirected into fat storage. Second, growth hormone stimulates lipolysis, the biological process of breaking down stored fat to use as energy. When growth hormone declines, this process slows. Fat that would have been mobilized and burned stays in storage instead. The pattern that results is a gradual redistribution of body composition. More fat, less muscle, even when diet and exercise habits have not meaningfully changed. This is why many people in their 40s and 50s feel like their body is working against them despite doing the same things that worked before. The inputs have not changed, but the hormonal environment those inputs are entering has. There is a critical relationship worth understanding. Insulin and growth hormone are inversely related. When insulin is high, growth hormone is suppressed. When insulin is low, growth hormone can rise. This is why fasting and sleep are the two most powerful natural levers for growth hormone. During both states, insulin drops to its lowest levels, and growth hormone pulses are able to fire without interference. A well-documented study found that a 24-hour fast can increase growth hormone levels by up to 5 times compared to fed state levels. Even an overnight fast of 14 to 16 hours creates a meaningful window of low insulin that allows natural growth hormone pulsing. How to address growth hormone directly? Protect deep sleep aggressively. The largest growth hormone pulse of your entire day occurs in the first deep sleep cycle of the night. Every disruption to that cycle reduces the pulse. Practice intermittent fasting consistently to extend the low insulin window during which growth hormone can operate. Train with resistance exercises regularly. The mechanical stress of lifting heavy things is one of the strongest natural stimulants for growth hormone outside of sleep. Reduce fast-digesting carbohydrates, particularly in the evening. Evening carbohydrate intake raises insulin precisely when you need it to be declining for optimal overnight growth hormone release. So let's map all 4 of these together clearly. Cortisol sends fat to the upper belly and visceral organs. It responds to chronic stress, poor sleep, and excess stimulation. Insulin sends fat to the lower back, hips, and diffusely across the midsection. It responds to frequent eating, high carbohydrate intake, and insufficient muscle mass. Estrogen sends fat to the hips, thighs, and lower belly. It responds to internal fat-derived estrogen production and external xenoestrogen exposure. And declining growth hormone allows fat to accumulate broadly while muscle quietly disappears. It responds to disrupted sleep, chronically elevated insulin, and insufficient mechanical loading through resistance training. 4 hormones, 4 different fat patterns, 4 different sets of interventions. Now here is the most important thing to take from this. Most people are not dealing with just one of these. Cortisol and insulin frequently run together because cortisol raises blood sugar, which raises insulin. Estrogen and insulin often coexist because visceral fat drives both. Declining growth hormone compounds the problem because less muscle means worse insulin sensitivity. These systems are interconnected, not isolated, which means fixing one tends to improve the others. When you lower cortisol through better sleep and less intense training, insulin sensitivity often improves at the same time. When you build muscle through resistance training, insulin clears glucose more efficiently, and growth hormone has more tissue to support. When you reduce xenoestrogen exposure and improve gut health, estrogen balance improves, and the fat storage signal in the hips and lower belly weakens. The question is not how to fix all 4 simultaneously. The question is which one is most dominant in your body right now. Look at where your fat is actually sitting. High, firm, and around the midsection above the navel, start with cortisol. Diffuse, soft, especially around the lower back and hips, start with insulin. Low, stubborn, resistant, even when you lose weight elsewhere, start with estrogen. Gradual and accompanied by muscle loss and slower recovery, start with growth hormone. You do not need to overhaul everything at once. Start with the hormone most clearly reflected in your body right now. Address it consistently for 6 to 8 weeks. Then reassess. You will likely find that as the dominant issue improves, the others begin to respond as well. Your body has not been working against you. It has been following the hormonal instructions it receives every day. Change the instructions consistently, and the distribution changes with them. If this helped you understand your own fat pattern more clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, which of these 4 hormones do you think is most dominant in your body right now? That answer alone might be the most useful thing you take from today.